Hey, what's up, guys? We have a bunch of new information about Armored Core that just dropped. IGN just did an interview with Miyazaki and Yamamura. I'm not going to read everything. I'm just going to focus on the bullet points that are important, the bits of new information, and I'm going to give you guys my insight as someone who's played nearly all Armored Core games before. So let's jump into it. You guys are going to find it very interesting, I promise. There's a lot of juicy information in that interview. Miyazaki himself admits that he is jealous of the development firepower of From Software that can bring to Armored Core 6 compared to when he developed Armored Core 4 on PS3. That is actually really cool to see because that means, Armored Core 6 is going to be, I don't want to say bigger, but it's going to be like bigger than other Armored Core games we had prior, so that is extremely exciting. Boss battles are the highlight of this game in this title, that Yamamura said in a separate statement. The essential of the boss battles in which the player reads the enemy's move and then plays games with them. As much as you get two camps, one saying that Armored Core won't be Souls-like and one that says that it will be Souls-like. As someone who's played most of the Armored Core games, I played nearly all of them since Armored Core 2. There was a few bosses which that was the case, like you had to sort of dodge their attack, but it was extremely rudimentary as opposed to like boss movesets from, say, a Souls game, right? So for the most part, it was not necessarily about reading the enemy's move, but a lot of the bosses in Armored Core were sort of like more like levels. The bosses were like big metal entity, like castles of different shapes and sizes, like walking castles and whatnot. A lot of the bosses were either that or they were other mechs themselves, which had the same capability of the players, but it was not necessarily about reading the moves. You just had to outplay the other mech as you would have outplayed, another player. So I find it very interesting that they say the essence of battles in which the players have to read enemies' moves. They're talking about the bosses here, of course. I think this is actually a Souls-like aspect that they're adding to it because I can see in that statement that they're probably introduce bosses that have more like telegraph moveset that the player has to react to accordingly, and the bosses are going to have like a specific set of moves that they're going to be able to pull off. So I think this is actually a Souls-like feature that they're implementing. And I think it's actually a pretty good one, if you ask me. That's going to bring more dynamism to boss battles in Armored Core, which were not necessarily bad before, but they certainly were similar to one another. So, where bosses like big castles and whatnot were closer to like levels and puzzles, it's interesting that they're also adding bosses more akin to the Souls formula. So I actually like that. Here's something interesting to note. It's more focused on single player than its predecessor, which here they're talking about Armored Core 5. Armored Core 5 was a bold attempt at large-scale multiplayer. So to me personally, a bit of disappointment there. I love single player, but the multiplayer aspect obviously is what I'm most interested in. And Armored Core 5 with its large-scale multiplayer was a big win. It was the most fun part of the game and what kept us playing, over and over. But let's keep on reading because they do talk about multiplayer afterward. Also here, they talk about the open world nature of Elden Ring, how we should not expect a Armored Core to be open world. The setting for Armored Core is mission based. So those of you who've played Armored Core, this is, standard news, nothing new that we did not expect really. Man, I just want to point out, my girl made me this honey concoction with apple in it, and it's so good. Like, I swear to God, it's so hot and so warming, and it's so good. I just wanted to throw that in there. After this delicious sip, they talk about how From Software will handle multiplayer. That's the thing I see the most interesting for me personally. So whether it will feature the arena once again, because they always had an arena in Armored Core, and it will. So the arena is going to make a comeback, which is good. Oh shit. Here we go, guys. This this is the one that sparks, different opinion and whatnot. Is it fair to say that Armored Core 6 will be closer to the Soulsborne's game than the series has been in the past? And the answer, for me, with no surprise, Miyazaki said, no, we've not been making a conscious effort to try to direct it toward more Soulsborne gameplay. Although, I want to just do devil's advocate here. Like we mentioned earlier, the addition of boss battles having moveset to me is clearly an indication of a Souls-like kind of concept because it affects gameplay directly. And while they have not made a conscious effort, I think in their effort to modernize, I think those who look for Souls-like feature will probably find them. Although for anyone who's played other Armored Core games before, I really don't think this is gonna feel like any different from any other Armored Core reboot that has taken place in the past. Other than maybe this game is probably going to be even better. I love how he says that they were looking back and trying to see what were the core concept of Armored Core and what made the series special. To me, like every time there's an introspection on the direction side, it's always fruitful, and I'm fairly confident that the outcome is going to benefit from that internal debate that they had about what defined the Armored Core series. So I think this is going to be very good. So again, they talk about a mech assembly and how you take it and bring it to battle, and how basically how your custom mech affects gameplay. It's crazy because this is really how I define some of these features in this one vid I did not publish yet, but I basically made that vid before reading the interview, and we kind of explained the same thing in different terms. But I'll publish this Armored Core vid that I'm talking about right after this interview. Here they say it's really about the high level of freedom that adjusting each individual part gives. This is absolutely core to Armored Core, the way Armored Core games plays, because every individual part of your robot has a direct impact on how your mech plays and feels like when you're playing with it on the battlefield. And when I say that, I really mean it. In like Souls game, for instance, because they talk about it's more liberating than just swapping out armor or equipment. If we compared that to Elden Ring, because most people here are Elden Ring players, you get a different feel in Elden Ring, not when you're changing your armor or even your talisman, because most of the time these are just damage boosts. You get a different experience when you're changing weapon. When you're using a different weapon, you actually get a tangible different gameplay experience in Elden Ring. Now though, in a game like Armored Core, you get that same tangible gameplay difference, but not just when you're swapping out your weapons. In fact, it's when you're swapping out any part. And we're going to delve deeper into that into the future. But in previous Armored Core games, let me give you a few examples. You had the head of your mech, which directly affected the range and the speed of lock-on. You had internal chips, which also affected range and speed of lock-on, as well as how wide of a lock-on system you had, like how wide your dashboard to lock-on was. You also had generators that affected how much energy output you could get, and that affected like what kind of freedom of movement and what kind of maneuvers you could pull off. Same with the boosters, because the boosters were directly related to speed and energy consumption. So depending on the boosters, you had boosters that were better to fly, you had boosters that were better for quick burst, you had boosters that were better for a long distance, like hovering. You had a lot of different types of boosters that were all different in not just their stats, but the tangible effect that they had on gameplay. And even down to like parts like arms, right? Where the arms, you just think they're there to hold your weapons, but arms add not only defense, weight, and energy consumption like everything else, but it also affected weapon stability. And the more weapon stability, it affected the speed of the lock-on, as well as the accuracy of your shots. So depending on your arms, you had some arms that were, everything had like some sort of downside and plus side. So maybe you had arms that had a lot of stability and accuracy, but these arms were very, very energy demanding. So maybe you had to build your mech with some sacrifices in mind, thinking that, okay, I don't necessarily want to have that much of energy consumption for my arms. I would rather have a bit less of an accuracy on my weapons and sacrifice that for something that's more efficient for my movement, for instance. So, again, big relationship here between armored core parts. Same with the legs. The legs were a big deal because the legs affected what kind of weapons you could have. Because tank legs can sustain more weight. The legs are really like kind of the building block for all your armored core, because the legs define what is your weight limit, and your weight limit defines everything else that's on your mech, because everything has to fit in that weight limit. So I'm just going over these little things quickly here to give you guys an idea of what it's like. But there are so much, each armored core part has a direct impact on gameplay, like they're mentioning here in this article. Again, yeah, it's pretty much what they're saying here. There's a much higher degree of freedom and being able to see these effects in game. Here again, just want to note real quick, Yamamura, who is the lead person working on Armored Core 6, was also the lead designer on Sekiro. So for those of you who enjoy Sekiro and like Sekiro combat, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to be the same game at all. But one thing to keep in mind though, I think it's fair to say that we should be confident that this person knows what they're doing, right? I think that's, a fair takeaway to take from this. Here again, there are no elements referring to Sekiro. No surprise here. But I feel both titles share the same essence of battling with aggressiveness, speed, and change in action-oriented fighting. I like that though. I like that because, I feel like when we say aggressive fighting, this is such a simple and, easy to throw out term, yet for some reason, right? For some reason, barely anyone in the gaming industry uses the term, we're trying to make a game that feels aggressive in combat. And this is exactly what good games are all about. It's to reward the aggressor when you're fighting. It's not to reward the one that's passive. It's to reward the aggressor here. And it's something we actually mention all the time when we refer to what the player should be rewarded for in Souls games too. And it's funny because we never really hear developers say that our game is going to feel aggressive or is going to reward being aggressive, yet they do it here. So this is definitely a big positive. You don't see that word thrown around often, yet it usually means very good thing for a game like this. So, oh, here we get actually real information though. This is concrete information on gameplay. By continuing to attack even the strongest enemy, the force of impact can break the enemy's posture and inflict large amount of damage. So I'm going to say this right now. This is not poise. This is a feature that has been in Armored Core 5. You had, like, if you did strong bursts of damage, you could break someone's armor and get larger damage and larger stagger over time. They had their own system related to that. And they also have another system in Armored Core 4 in the form of Primal Armor. So when you break Primal Armor, you get much more force of impact. And as we're seeing in the trailer, there seems to be a return of Primal Armor. There's a moment here. Let's... Whoops. God damn it. Oh my god. I just age restricted myself. Well, anyway, there's a moment in the trailer where it looks like there's an EMP blowing up, but this is actually primal armor on one of the mech that just gets activated, because when you activate your primal armor, you basically like remove your armor and you open yourself to taking more damage, but you basically you kind of make your mech explode in some fashion without destroying it. And so it's kind of like a high risk, high reward type of play, but we see it in the trailer. I wish I could have showed you, but I'm sorry, I just age restricted myself. Here, the IGN person asking if they're incorporating counter mechanic, like, clearly has no idea what an Armored Core game is. And then Yamamura replies, rather than calling it a counter mechanic, we want to stress This is the reason to continue attacking. This is not really, a complicated concept. It's just that when you're building your robot, you always want to keep in mind what will break the enemies, either the enemies like defense or primal armor. This is mostly what this is going to be all about. It's going to be mostly affected the moment you're building your mech. Once you're in battle, this is going to be felt in a sense that it's going to reward sustained pressure, like you're saying here, continuing on the offensive or whatever. But it's not going to have like a like you're not like tangibly going to go for that sort of stuff while you're playing. It's just going to be like a mechanic that's in there to reward being on the offensive pretty much and create some sort of burst damage. Okay, so another interesting bit here. As someone who's played Armored Core, I can really like relate to some of these concepts that he's talking about. So here you want to create chances for yourself in combat and turn the battle to the player's advantage. Most people would overlook this, I think. Most people that have never played Armored Core games. But for those who've played Armored Core games before, it should be noted that it was hard to come back in Armored Core games when there was a difference in HP, or they call it AP. But it was hard to make a comeback because the fights were made in a way so that it was impossible to avoid trading damage. You're still two robots fighting each other, so unless you're completely behind your enemy target for a long period of time, which is very hard to do in PvP, it was very, very difficult to come back from a huge health deficit. But I think the addition of, burst damage related to either the primal armor that we mentioned, or breaking the enemies, which is not necessarily posture, but breaking the enemy's defense, that in itself is probably going to make it so that it is possible to tilt the battle in your favor, even if you are in a losing position, if of course you get a lot of damage on your opponent in one go. So if you get one good play, you're going to be one good sustained play, we should say, you're going to be rewarded for it. Here again, man, these IGN questions, I feel like these IGN questions are perfect because they really sound like they're coming from someone who has no clue what an Armored Core game is. And here, what does it look like in the context of Armored Core being more about guns and missiles that, for example, Sekiro, which was more about swords? Of course, Armored Core has melee weapons, but often they've only been one option versus many different range options that you have, blah, 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 blah. Basically, like, how do swords fit in all of this? I'm used to Souls games with swords. Is it only about weapons? And then the guy says pretty much, yes, Armored Core is generally about weapons, about guns and missiles. So we want to cater to this aspect this time as well, of course. We have various weapons for various range and various encounters. Oh, both in the two hands and on the back. Okay, yeah, in the front two hands. I was about to say, like, two-handing weapons is going to be new, but no, in both hands and on the back, so similar to all other Souls games. Sorry, all Armored Core games. But we wanted to put an emphasis on melee as well. Oh, here we go. This could be interpreted as Souls-like, right? But when he says afterward, so if the players are this way inclined, we do have some nice melee options if they want to dive there and go close quarter combat. I think the reason he said, but we wanted to put the emphasis on melee weapons as well, I think it was because of the way the question was, formulated. Because you always want to sort of cater and please whatever the question is, because they're still trying to sell a product. But in that particular sense, melee weapons have always been part of Armored Core games. And I don't see this being any different here, but I just don't want people to be misled, thinking that Armored Core games are going to have a stronger emphasis on melee weapons this time around, even if they say, but we wanted to put an emphasis on melee as well. So if the players are this way inclined, This is mostly related to the way the question is asked, because for the most part, it's going to be focused around weapon and range base. But again, melee weapons have always been part of Armored Core games. It's just that I don't see it this time around being, melee weapons take a larger portion of what the players are going to be inclined to play with. Most of the weapons in Armored Core have always been ranged weapons and guns and missiles and laser cannons and all that sort of stuff. And blade weapons, for instance, I've been there since the very start of Armored Core, and in fact, in the first two Armored Core games, you were forced to have a blade on one hand and a weapon in the other hand, and in some Armored Cores that came after that, they introduced the idea that the player can put whatever they want on both hands. So from that point on, Armored Core games started to be more focused on having two weapons in both hands and having like missiles and big cannons on the back. But that does not mean that melee is not going to be an important part of the game. I think it's just going to be as important as it always was. For those of you who are wondering, melee in Armored Core has always been this sort of like kind of niche playstyle where it's very rewarding to pull off, say, against another player. It's very efficient for the damage and for like how much it costs, because you have to pay for your ammo in this game. Uh, for like missions and the player and the campaign and whatnot. So melee was very good in that regard. But as far as playing against other players or playing against other ACs, other mechs, it was difficult to pull off, and it took a lot of skill, but could be used properly and be very rewarding. So I just want to throw that out there. I don't think this is going to change. Like I said, I think this question is going to lead to some misconception around the community, but I'm going to say right now, I don't think the game is going to focus on melee at all. I think this is, just the way they asked the question, and it should be taken with a grain of salt, in my humble opinion. Another IGN-like question. They talk about Elden Ring's accessibility with the friendlier checkpoints and friendly summons, and how does that relate to Armored Core 6? So I'm happy that Miyazaki said that. We didn't necessarily take the same approach here with the game design. Honestly, again, these IGN questions are really coming from the perspective of someone who has no idea what an Armored Core game is. And I'm appreciating that Miyazaki is being honest here. It's not the same thing at all. This sort of like checkpoint thing does not necessarily translate to Armored Core games, because Armored Core games are mission based. So, if you fail the mission, so it's either you restart the mission or the mission is gone until you do another playthrough. Usually that was the case in previous games. So, that's something to keep in mind. Here, Miyazaki talks about how the studio's firepower has improved in terms of, they got more people, they got better tech, and they're basically able to do things they were not able to do in the past. I love it when Miyazaki said that when he was director in Armored Core 4 and Forenser, the level of resources and the cost and time they could dedicate to the game development was just completely different. And the way he says completely different kind of suggests that it was like nowhere near what it is now. And he also mentions that he's jealous of what the team can do today because they have much more resources and leverage. So it's always nice to read that. So it's pretty exciting. Okay, now an actual interesting questions. The IGN person asked, now with more resources available, like what is the difference? Like what can you do now that you couldn't do before? So actually interesting. Let's hear that answer. The first one being the visuals. So the visual fidelity is going to be higher this time around. Honestly, not really surprised. But to be fair, even if you look at Armored Core games now, I know that some people might feel that the colors are not that great or that the game doesn't look that great. But I guarantee you that Armored Core games, when they came out, for each one of them for their time, they were very good, like graphical wise. So I'm not really worried about the graphical fidelity, honestly. But it's nice to say that obviously it's nice to see that, you know, they've doubled down on that and they're able to achieve better visuals. Here they also mention how they were able to pour more resources into the sound design as well. That's often overlooked, but gritty sound can make a big difference. It's a bit unfortunate that they don't go into, you know, more details about stuff that is not, you know, technically related. Like, you know, they talk about better sound design and better graphics and whatnot, but I would have been curious to know, like, in a gameplay sense, you know, they just say they're able to expand in the gameplay sense. I would have been curious to know, like, what gameplay wise they were able to do with their extra resources now that they were not before. Like, maybe they were able to make more parts and more customization than ever before, but they don't say that, so I don't know. So I mean, it's just a wild guess at this point. IGN asks, Armored Core may not be trying to be a Souls game, but does it have more of a Soulsborne essence than previous Armored Core games? What I mean for the what that means for the series, and then they define what they see in Soulsborne essence, like heavy combat, mystery, exploration, difficulty, and sense of darkness in the game. I mean, to be honest, like, these are very vague terms. You know, you could, if actually, you know, Souls-like was defined by an era of mystery, exploration, difficulty, and, you know, darkness, a lot of games could qualify that don't look and feel like a Souls game at all. So I'm not really sure about how the question is formulated, but let's see what their answer is. And then IGN also tries to guide the question and say that it would be natural for an Armored Core game to go like open world and get away from mission based structure, which is, you know, it's really coming from a position of pure ignorance, not a lot of respect for the way these questions are asked. It's like, you know, the interviewer want the game to be something that it's not, and I would really want the audience that's watching right now to not, you know, put themselves in the same position. What you want to be in, like the state of mind you want to be when this game come out, is be ready to embrace something new, something you've never played before, a new experience, a new mechanics, keeping an open mind, not closing yourselves to what you already know of other Souls games. Okay. Unfortunately, though, in the answer Miyazaki gives, he does not refute or necessarily agree with anything the person asks. Pretty much says that those are broad terms that, you know, From Software is not necessarily, doesn't consider, you know, an air of mystery and darkness and whatnot to be like Souls-like teams, but more like a philosophy for the studio in general, which, you know, obviously I agree with, but I would go even further and say that this is not necessarily even just a From Software thing. This goes way beyond that. These are just like very broad concepts. So I think the question was not asked properly. I think Souls-like is definitely a thing, but I don't think it would be defined by what the interviewer asked, really. So you don't really get the proper answer that comes with it. And then again, interviewer asks, why is From Software so drawn to apocalyptic settings? Again, I don't think this is a very good question because it's not just From Software. You know, apocalyptic settings just open a gate to imaginations and what could. You know, this is just sci-fi and fantasy and whatnot. This doesn't just apply to From Software. This applies to really any studio. Like, From Software is not the only studio who makes post-apocalyptic games, sci-fi games, and fantasy games, let's be honest. Or dark games. Okay, this is the interesting part. How much can you tell me about Armored Core 6 multiplayer? And then here we go. Yes, we do plan to have a versus mode similar to previous Armored Core titles, where you'll be able to customize your mech and take that fully customized mech into battle with others. But they will reveal more detail about this in a later date. The main focus on Armored Core 6, on the story mode at least, is having that story develop and play out. We've concentrated on single player for the story mode. So I don't know if that means that you're not going to be able to co-op for the story. If that's the case, that would actually be a bummer. Um, but since it seems like they have more in stock for multiplayer, we're gonna have to wait to get more information on multiplayer. You know, the game is not coming out too soon, so we have a lot more informations to receive before the game comes out. So, you know, still interesting. We got multiplayer confirmation. No surprise again, but a bit worrying that there's a focus so much on single player that the way they phrase it, it might not be co-op. I think co-op was also kind of fun, you know, for Armored Core games. Going through the story with a buddy was a nice addition. Um, I'm not too sure what to think about that. They probably will have some modes that are able to be played with two players and whatnot. Since they do have a versus modes, wild guess here, it's not just going to be 1v1, it's going to be team versus teams as well. But yeah, we're going to have to wait and see for more information about that. Man, IGN being IGN, but although to be fair, the mech with the backpack in the trailer with scraps on it, this was fairly new for an Armored Core games. Like you would have never seen like a mech that had a backpack with scraps on it. So I'm actually interested to hear that answer. And then obviously, you know, IGN being IGN, they ask if it's going to be open world exploration. I don't really know why they're so stuck up on being like Armored Core being open world. And then Yamamura answers, just to be clear, Armored Core 6 is a mission based structure. Okay, so let's just that sink in. It's mission based. It's not, you know, it's not, you don't just roam around endlessly in the world. It's mission based structure, just like other Armored Core games. And here he mentioned that this shot is just a straightforward representation of the world of Armored Core 6, where the mecha pilots have to survive through such dramatic changes. So that's what they're trying to convey in that shot. Armored Core having the backpack of scraps is really just a representation that says, like, you know, mercenaries and Armored Core pilots after the disaster, you know, they don't have like a lot of places to go and have to like survive by picking up scraps on their own. But this is not necessarily going to translate into gameplay. It's just like a representation of what is happening in the world of Armored Core 6. Oh, okay. Actually, interesting here. That's a good question. Will it once again reset the story, or will it continue on from Armored Core 5? And this is what I was telling you about, how you know, Armored Core games usually get a reboot when another numbered Armored Core comes out. So from Armored Core 4, it got a reboot. Armored Core 5 got a reboot, and now Yamamura says, yes, Armored Core 6 is going to be a completely fresh and new story, so you don't need to have played previous Armored Core games to enjoy Armored Core 6 and to understand what the hell is happening. So again, we get confirmation that it is actually a reboot, so that is nice. There are no direct links to previous games in terms of continuing the story. So again, the number 6 is more like a, you know, kind of a tradition at this point. Okay, what is Armored Core 5 approach to difficulty? Okay, here he says we wanted to have some nice tempo changes and some nice balance to the difficulty and level challenge. So it can vary depending on mission type. You know, it's funny because in some Armored Core games, like you would get various missions, and From Software would try to surprise you in the difficulty of the mission. So they would pretty much give you a mission difficulty in the briefing. So like before you accept the mission, like it would say like what the difficulty of the mission was. Some missions were very difficult and they paid a lot. Some missions were easy and they didn't pay as much. But here's the catch though. From Software, from the previous games, likes to throw those hard balls. So sometimes you would get like a mission that was classified as an easy mission, and then all of a sudden you would get ambushed throughout the mission and it would become a very difficult mission. And on the other hand, sometimes like it did not even pay like extra for it. So they would throw like hard ball at you sometimes, where you would expect, you know, to be an easy mission where the briefing told you that you had to destroy X and Y, you know, small mobs and whatnot, and you were getting geared for that. And then on the other side, you get ambushed by some mechs and maybe even two mechs or whatnot during that mission, and you'd have to go and fight a 1 versus 2, out of nowhere during what was supposed to be an easy mission. So when they say they have a change of tempo and the difficulty, sometimes you actually get easy missions, sometimes you get hard missions, sometimes they throw a hard ball at you, or other times it's the other way around. Like they give you a hard mission and then they try to surprise you, like the enemy forces have left whatever facility you were trying to infiltrate, and so you basically had almost no defense to fight, and so the mission was supposed to be harder, but something happened in the game that made it so that the enemy forces have left and you pretty much just skim through the entire thing. So they always try to surprise you in many ways to like make you like on your toes and force you to always have to keep your mech kind of ready for any situation, in a sense where if you just always tries to optimize for the mission briefing, you might get caught like flat-footed at some point and under-geared for whatever hardball they throw at you. Okay, here IGN asked, what are the lessons you learned as a game designer when you worked on Sekiro and then applying that to Armored Core 6? And then Yamamura answers that they don't play the same. Sekiro only has one weapon, whereas Armored Core 6, the approach is quite different, mainly because you assemble your robot and you have like many weapons, and so the battle really starts in the AC Garage. So Armored Core fans are going to be familiar. AC Garage is back. The AC Garage is mostly where you're going to be spending most of your time in Armored Core games, pretty much tweaking your robot, getting it ready for the next mission, as we mentioned earlier. And you test your performance for your AC and test simulations and whatnot. So again, they mentioned this is really part of the strategy. This time, I think that affects the difficulty greatly. So that's also true. Depending on what kind of Armored Core unit you bring to the battle, some missions can vary greatly in difficulty. So if you are under-geared or if you do not choose the right strategy to approach one mission, it can become increasingly difficult fairly quickly. Whereas if you're really prepared for a mission and you have all the right parts and all the right strategy and an approach to said mission, then it can make the mission much more easier. Okay, here they mention specifics. Armored Core has had generators, radiators, and many parts, with Armored Core 6 have even more parts or the same number of parts. And also will it have RPG progression? That RPG progression, I love it. It's so IGN. And then he answers, yes, in terms of the type of parts, you can switch around when assembling your mech. This is going to be what you're familiar from past games. All right, so we can expect, similar customization as previous Armored Core games. So that means they're probably not introducing a bunch of new parts that we've never seen before. It's going to be generators, boosters, internal chip, head, chest, legs, arms, shoulder units, all 4 weapons. That's usually the bread and butter of these Armored Core games. So fair to say that we don't think that that they're going to be adding like crazy new parts. So here they say there will be a wide variety of different parts that you can exchange. Oh yeah, and here, just because of the way the question is asked, like, asking about RPG progression in an Armored Core game is a bit strange. But Miyazaki here attempts to answer the question by saying that, when you get to buy new weapons and grab new weapons, this is the general game cycle. So you could consider that leveling, but there's no like leveling per se in Armored Core games. So that's good to know. They're not changing the formula to be completely different. Okay, so here again, this is information for people who've never played Armored Core games. The general game is to clear missions and you earn money and use that money to buy more expensive weapons and parts for your mech, which has always been the case before. So, they're going back to the roots again. And also within that, you are tuning these parts and you're tuning the weapons and tuning your mech to suit your playstyle. So it seems here the tuning is an interesting part because we've had weapon tuning in Armored Core 5. And the form that weapon tuning took was basically you had to farm weapons by, like, you buy a weapon and then you decide to tune your weapon in a bit. You play with that weapon and you kill X amount of enemies and whatnot, and then your weapon is fully tuned in. And there was some sort of like RNG based for the tuning, so you had to like grind a few weapons to get the perfect one you wanted. I'm not sure that this is going to be implemented in the same way, but this could be translated to be like the same type of weapon tuning that was in Armored Core 5. Okay, this is an interesting question. In terms of how the mechs actually move and fly, will it be similar to past Armored Core games? Okay, so I'm interested to see that answer because that actually differs from one Armored Core to the next. So like Armored Core 3 and prior, the mechs did not fly the same way as Armored Core 4, and it did not fly the same way with wall jumping in Armored Core 5. But here they just say, yes, you can imagine something similar to what we had in previous Armored Core games. So how you can customize your mech parts and whatnot. You know, you can tune your generators, boosters to improve boosts or flight time or boost height, more explosiveness of the boost. It's funny because I use those exact words in in a vid I have not published yet, you know, describing how the change in boosters affected your playstyle, which is interesting. But they don't necessarily go into specific to which Armored Core is Armored Core 6 closest in terms of how you fly it. But if I had to go on a wild guess here, I would say that quick boosters are likely going to be there. Overboost as well, probably. Cycle. And the only thing that I could see being here or not that could change is wall jumping is either going to be there or not. I think that's going to be like the only change you're going to see from like Armored Core 5 and 4. So I think the flying is going to be similar to those, honestly. Here, IGN, when I listen to you talk about Armored Cores, in so many ways it feels like a traditional Armored Core game, which is exactly what they're making, but they're opening it up for new players to actually enjoy, because Armored Core games have always been niche, but they've always been very good games. So you don't want to you know, tear everything and make it upside down. It's always been like Armored Core games have always been amazing. It's just that now they have even more resource to pour into the game. They also ask about, you know, again, how does this compare to like Souls games and whatnot? Okay, here, one thing I've noticed in this answer that's interesting, this time, while there is an aspect of exploration in Armored Core 6, we wanted to focus on the breadth of variety in assembly and customizing your own mech. You know what? Maybe here, they said there might be an aspect of exploration, which would be new, honestly. Like my guess here is that when you are on a mission, you might be able to like find parts during the mission like hidden throughout levels. So this is what I am guessing from this, and we've started somewhat to see this in Armored Core 5. Like in Armored Core 5, you could find scraps of some weapons here and there in some missions, but it was not implemented that well. But I think they might actually double down on that and try to push it more forward and integrate it into a better manner in Armored Core 6. So, you know, interesting bit of information in that. I think we might have this, you know, finding new parts. And that's probably what what Miyazaki means here when he says that we wanted to put the focus on breadth of variety in assembly, customizing your own mech, and really the feeling that you're piloting the mech that you've carefully put time into. Also, we felt that the mission-based structure was benefit for this because it allows you to choose and customize before each sortie, so before each mission. Okay, so I also want to note this here. I've had questions about first-person mode in Armored Core 6, if there was going to be a first-person. I said no, there would not be, because this is an Armored Core title. Armored Core titles are third-person, and we get a confirmation here. It's going to be a third-person action game with a heavy focus on customizing your mech. Also, something that is important to mention that the article finishes up on, Miyazaki talks about the importance of the mission-based structure and how it allows you to pretty much pick and choose what kind of mech you bring for each mission. And it does have a very big impact on the tempo and the pace and what you play and whatnot, and like the speed at which you traverse the map in the mission you're playing. When you are preparing for a mission, you get to choose what you think would be optimal and what you think would be appropriate for the mission. That opens up the possibility to play with new things for each mission. So like, you're making your own mech. By the way, you make more than one mech in these games. You don't just have one mech. You have like schematics for multiple mechs, so that maybe in one mission you have this tank that you're ready, and maybe your favorite mech, although is not a tank, even if you're using the tank a lot, maybe your favorite mech is a bipedal that has like some cool weapons and whatnot. You have all these schematics saved, and you have this database of all these schematics. So as long as you have the parts, you just load in your schematics, and then you go on a mission with whatever armored core you choose, and you can customize them at will on top of that. But this opens up the possibility of always trying to change things up, always trying to tweak things, which is why they keep mentioning how much customization is a core concept, because you're never really, at least on your first playthrough of Armored Core, I would be extremely surprised if you always keep bringing the same exact mech for every single mission. You'll always want to tweak things here and there to improve upon something and to maybe adjust something to your need. So, the playstyle is going to vary a lot from mission to mission in how you build your own robot. So this is what this whole interview ends on. Very nice information. We get a lot in this. I am very excited. In conclusion, though, I'm going to say some things. They are pretty explicit in this interview that Armored Core 6 is not going to be Souls-like. Although I have to mention that as devil's advocate, there seems to be some particular aspects, like the way he mentions that the bosses seem to have move sets now, and you have to dodge boss attack. That's very Souls-like, but for the most part, this definitely feels like Armored Core 6 is going to be a tried and true Armored Core game with a heavy inspiration from its predecessors. So I hope you guys enjoyed this interview breakdown from someone who actually played most of the Armored Core games. My first Armored Core game was on PlayStation 2. I played Armored Core 2, I played Armored Core 3, I played Armored Core LimitBreaker, I played Armored Core 4, I played Armored Core Forencer, 5, Verdict Day. So, I had a lot of experience with these games. I have a good feel for what to expect. In my head, like, everything is pretty clear. There's only a few variables, in my opinion, that can change. So I'll be making more Armored Core content to make you guys understand, maybe, or to maybe show to you guys like what Armored Core games are all about, what you should expect, and how amazing they are, because I love these games. Like, these are some of the best games out there, and it's amazing that for the first time more people are going to discover them, and how amazing Armored Core games are. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll catch you guys up next time. Take care.